I was always interested in the way that the world didn't have to be the way it was, and it could be different. The basis of that is an idea. So what we say here is the idea is important, then the work follows to express the idea. I was part of a generation that was trying to break away from the legacy of the 50s, which in England was very confined and like a sort of straitjacket. And so there we come to the title of this exhibition. I dissented from that, and I wanted to make another language which would express a new vision of the world we were moving into. And one of the symbolic expressions of that was the modern building in London. So I made a series of architectural pieces. I don't know if it occurred to you, but there was a big shift culturally, especially with artists and people like that, where they moved out of the idea of phenomenology into the sort of referentiality, the idea of using referential language. And I wanted to demonstrate that a work of art could involve anyone, and it could go anywhere. It didn't have to be locked up in a museum. It doesn't have to be locked up in an art gallery. It could be anywhere. And also I wanted to show that an artwork could deal with the everyday. It could deal with the fabric of life that people live. So therefore, the meaning of the work had to come to the audience, not the audience go to the work of art. Yeah, metaphor, this is a work from the early 70s. It's an expression of society, it's a simulation. And it's a dynamic state that is enacted by two people, and they create a model of society through agreement. What the work is doing is providing these two people with a meta-language from which they can interface with each other and externalize their perceptions to each other. These pieces are around about 62 to 65, and again, it's just to do with really my idea about the audience. And I wanted to make a work of art that was not really aesthetical, but was really practical. So they're all presented together, you know, this was the power of it. Darkness, I felt, was a constant. You know, like when you go to a gallery, you've got other pictures around the floor, other people. So these pieces originally were presented in a kind of maze that was dark, and then you just came across each piece as a unique thing, and you went from one to the other. You know, so you weren't in a, like here we've got a group of people. The idea is you had an individual experience. Just to say that by 64, 65, I had a sort of crisis point about the identity of the artist. I felt that really in this atmosphere that was around at the time, this was a redundant kind of identity to take on. People were coming up to me and say, well, look, man, I'm creative. And I'm a scientist or a psychologist. So what's so special about you? You know, I mean, I'm doing half of these sort of things you're doing, I'm talking about as well, you see. And I began to think, wow, yeah, maybe these guys have got something. And I thought, well, yeah, but I still wonder, so what I need to do perhaps is go straight into the fabric of the world, the society. So I stopped calling myself an artist, and I call myself a conceptual designer. And this was an amazing period. It only lasted about 9 months because unfortunately I couldn't sell anything. You know, I was so impoverished I had to give it up. I've always worked with printed matter to externalize my ideas. You know, the idea of a manifesto is this, is to create a space. That's the idea, a space of understanding. So you put the manifesto in advance of your action. So that's how it was traditionally seen. You know, you proclaimed what you were going to do, and you created a kind of psychological, or you know, a sort of space of acceptance, and then you went and did it. I would like to talk about this because, well, that's a sort of early punk piece that I made in the early 70s. This is a really important work. This girl lived on this housing estate abutting the next to the wasteland, but if you look at it, you see she's rejecting the male stereotype of her, or just society, not particularly male, and she wants to be something else. She wants to be herself. That's what she's saying. I want to be myself. I don't want to be like how you want me to be. I've got something, I want to be me, you know. So that's an important piece. You know, at the beginning of the early 80s or late 70s, especially in London, it was a revolution going on in a way. So I kind of try to embody this in my own work. And one of the things that I was interested in, or got caught, was this, you know, there was this sort of punk revolution going on, and people were developing languages of not to communicate or to actually keep you away. They didn't want to be, they wanted to be with themselves. They didn't want people engaging with them. And I then went to an area which I knew of the wastelands in West London. These wastelands became kind of islands of freedom, of anarchy, places where people could go to do things they couldn't do in society, where they felt free. You know, and I went with them into the wastelands, and I told them my ideas, you know, talked to them on the street, and they got interested. And I was working with Pat Purdy, and I was still using the sort of like 70s things. I was putting these texts and so on, and then making photographs of these things. And suddenly this Pat Purdy turned around to me and she said, "Hey," she said, why are you photographing these things? Why don't you just take them? I thought, well, yeah, why not? Just take them. And then when I got back in the studio, and she came with it, because people worked in my studio as well. I went to them, they came to me, you see. You know, and she said, well, I said, I don't know why you're laying these letters out like, you know, like this. She said, just write it. She said, and she got a pen and she just wrote it on. So there we are. This is some of the smaller works that we created. One day I happened to be going towards the Earl's Court Road. I saw this student of mine, looking very disheveled and white-faced. I said, "Oh, hi, Kev." I said, "What's up? Where have you been?" He said, "Oh, I went to this club. It was called the Cha-Cha Club. It was amazing." And he was telling me about how these groups of people were setting up their own sort of clubs in London at that time. That they were sort of just up made between themselves, you know. They would hire some room or something from another club and then make that night their own night, you know. But it wasn't really about music, it was more about community. And I thought, wow, this place sounds amazing. So I managed to get in there. So these works here were made, you know, these came after the Wasteland works, but you can see the sort of connection. And I did ask people to contribute like to the work directly. You know, I sort of thought it was kind of interesting almost to start from a sort of zero. You know, you just say, if I met you, I'd sort of say, well, we talk, you know, and maybe we'd talk for a month or so, meet, have a drink, talk, think what we're going to do. And then it was sort of, I said, well, we'd make some photographs, and you'd look at the photographs and decide, you think, well, maybe we do some more photographs. So the idea is that we're making a work. It's never really like a documentation about the person. It's about how aspects of their lives could be of symbolic and interest to a viewer, you know. Well, it's like this piece at the end, you know, which was one of the most evil situations I ever went into. Where I went into this place, it was a little house in Acton, it was sort of nowhere place, and it was all painted black, and I went there, and the windows were black, everything was black, and this matte black. I opened the door, it was all black, and there were these skulls and skeletons and kind of weird candle things and going on. And then I came in, and the guy was all in black, you know, this white face, you know. And I said, "It's Gary." I said, "Gary," one of the things I said, "How do you see the future, Matt?" He said, "Well, the future is all going to be black." so then about, what was it, 15, 20 years later, I was in Bond Street, and this guy came in this Armani suit, you know. He said, "Hi, Steve." I said, "Oh, Gary." I said, "You look amazing. What do you do?" He said, "I run an advertising agency." So we have to understand that it's just a moment in people's lives. Do you see what I mean? And the world, you're always moving on in yourself, and you know, you cannot. You see, in the 50s, it's very difficult. You were tempted to be like, you were going to be that person. The person you were the person you were going to be. That's what I try to break out of. Do you see what I mean? And in times of Gary, it wasn't like that at all. You know, he could move through. He could become different people. Do you see what I mean? It was very difficult. So that is a liberation of contemporary society. You know, you feel you can become different people in your own lifetime and move on without being afraid. Now, this is another work where you could be easily afraid.